What are some unexplained deep-sea mysteries? Story 1. One of the strangest and least talked about deep-sea mysteries is something called DL vertical migration. And the weirdest part? It happens every single day on a massive scale, yet we still don't fully understand it. Basically, countless tiny ocean creatures, phytoplankton, zooplankton, jelly-like animals, shrimp, and even small fish, spend the daytime hundreds of meters deep in the dark ocean. Then, when the sun sets, they all start moving upward toward the surface. We're talking about entire layers of life rising through the water column like an invisible elevator. Then before sunrise, they all go back down again. Scientists believe this is the largest daily migration on Earth, far bigger than herds on land or bird migrations in the sky. Trillions of organisms participate every night across the world's oceans. But here's where it gets mysterious. How do creatures with no complex brains know exactly when to move? Many of them live so deep that sunlight barely reaches them. Yet somehow they stay perfectly synchronized with the day-night cycle. Even stranger, this movement is so massive that early naval sonar systems during World War II actually thought the migrating animals were the seafloor rising and falling every night. The leading theory is that these creatures rise at night to feed safely under the cover of darkness, avoiding predators that hunt by sight. But that still doesn't explain the incredible precision of the timing or how such tiny organisms coordinate the movement across entire oceans. Every sunset, an entire hidden ecosystem ascends from the darkness, feeds in the open water, and then disappears back into the abyss before dawn, like a ghostly ocean commute we're only beginning to understand. Story 2. One of the coolest and creepiest deep-sea mysteries people don't talk about enough is what happens when a whale dies in the open ocean. You'd think the story ends there, but in reality, it's just the beginning. When a whale carcass sinks to the seafloor, it creates something scientists call a whale fall. And it basically becomes a giant underwater buffet that can support entire ecosystems for decades. The first stage is pretty chaotic. As the whale hits the seafloor, scavengers show up almost immediately. We're talking sharks, hagfish, sleeper sharks, giant isopods, and deep-sea fish tearing into the soft tissue. These animals can strip thousands of pounds of flesh surprisingly quickly, sometimes within months. But once the meat is gone, things get even stranger. The whale's bones are packed with fat and nutrients deep inside the marrow, and this is where specialized bacteria come in. These microbes break down the oils trapped in the bones, releasing chemicals that support entire colonies of weird deep-sea organisms. Some of the strangest residents are Osedax worms, also known as bone-eating worms. They don't even have mouths. Instead, they drill root-like structures directly into the bones and rely on symbiotic bacteria to digest the nutrients for them. Eventually, long after the bones have been picked clean, the skeleton itself becomes a hard surface in the otherwise muddy seafloor. Corals, sea anemones, sponges, and other deep-sea life settle onto it, turning the whale's remains into a mini reef. What's wild is that a single whale carcass can support life for 30 to 50 years. So in the deep ocean, death isn't really the end. It's more like the start of an entire hidden ecosystem. Story 3. Another deep-sea mystery that still blows scientists' minds is the existence of entire ecosystems that don't rely on sunlight at all. Almost every ecosystem on Earth ultimately depends on the sun. Plants use sunlight to convert carbon dioxide into energy through photosynthesis, and everything else in the food chain depends on that process in one way or another. But deep in the ocean, sometimes thousands of meters below the surface, sunlight never reaches the seafloor. It's completely black down there. For a long time, scientists assumed nothing complex could survive in those conditions. Then, in the late 1970s, researchers exploring the ocean floor discovered hydrothermal vents, cracks in the Earth's crust that spew out superheated water loaded with minerals and chemicals, especially sulfur. And surrounding these vents, entire thriving ecosystems. Instead of plants, these communities are built on special bacteria that use a process called chemosynthesis. Instead of using sunlight, these bacteria convert chemicals like hydrogen sulfide from the vents into energy. Basically, they turn toxic chemicals into food. Those bacteria become the base of the entire food web. Giant tube worms, clams, shrimp, and other strange creatures host the bacteria inside their bodies or feed on them directly. In turn, larger predators like fish, octopuses, and crabs feed on those animals. Some of these creatures look almost alien. Tube worms can grow over 2 meters long, yet they don't even have mouths or stomachs. They rely completely on their internal bacteria for survival. What makes this so mysterious is that these ecosystems prove life can thrive without sunlight, powered purely by chemicals from the Earth itself. It's one of the reasons scientists think similar life might exist in the hidden oceans of places like Europa or Enceladus, moons orbiting far from the sun. The deep ocean might be showing us a preview of how life could exist elsewhere in the universe. Story 4. There's a lesser-known nightmare lurking in the deep ocean that most people never hear about. Extremely resilient microorganisms that can survive in places where almost nothing else can. Some species of bacteria, algae, and microscopic fungi found in deep marine environments are so tough that once they get into human environments, they can be incredibly difficult to get rid of. These microbes evolved to survive in some of the harshest conditions on Earth: high pressure, near freezing temperatures, total darkness, and very little food. To deal with that, they developed survival strategies that make them ridiculously hardy. Many can form protective layers, go dormant for long periods, and then reactivate when conditions become favorable again. Now imagine bringing something like that home without realizing it. If contaminated seawater, mud, or biological material gets into something like boots or equipment, those microorganisms can sometimes hitch a ride. If the boots stay damp and get stored somewhere dark and cool, like under a bed or in a closet, they suddenly have the exact conditions they need to wake up and start spreading. Over time, they can colonize fabrics, leather, wood, and carpets, forming stubborn biofilms that cling to surfaces. These microbial films can be extremely resistant to cleaning products and normal household disinfectants. Once they spread through porous materials, getting rid of them can become a serious problem. In extreme cases, infestations like this can force people to throw away furniture, replace flooring, and deep clean entire homes just to stop the growth. It's a weird reminder that the ocean isn't just full of massive creatures and mysterious animals. It's also home to microscopic life forms that are unbelievably tough, capable of surviving environments that would instantly kill most organisms on Earth. Story 5. 3/4 of the answers here are not at all about the deep sea. There are plenty of interesting things going on down there. About a century and a half ago, it was thought that there was no deep sea life. A researcher named Edward Forbes decided that at 300 fathoms, 550 meters below sea level, life ceased to exist. He dredged samples from the ocean and found a trend of decreasing life. Quite simply, his linear fit reached a 0 point at 550 meters. Now, we know that there is life well below that point. Heck, we've seen life in the Mariana Trench, which is 11,000 meters deep, more than 20 times deeper than the dead zone Edward Forbes predicted. Oceanography is a young field. Anyhow, I think the coolest thing about the deep is riftia worms. These tube worms live along mid-ocean ridges in the deep. They actually don't have any digestive system. Their tubes are lined up and down with bacteria that take up most of their weight. These bacteria can take the hydrogen sulfide that spews out of the mid-ocean seamounts and convert them into organic compounds for the worms to eat. Oh, and these bacteria line the insides of giant white clams that live down there. It's a wild place. Story 6. Scientists have seriously explored using the deep ocean floor as a place to store nuclear waste. It sounds a little scary at first, burying radioactive material under the sea, but the reasoning behind it is actually pretty fascinating. Far below the ocean floor, there are massive layers of sediment known as pelagic clays. These are extremely fine, slowly accumulating sediments that settle in the deepest parts of the ocean, often thousands of meters below the surface. What makes them interesting is their chemistry. Pelagic clays are very good at binding radionuclides, which are the radioactive particles found in nuclear waste. Basically, the clay acts like a natural trap. When radionuclides come into contact with it, the particles tend to stick to the clay instead of moving freely through water. That means the radioactive material would have a much harder time spreading through the environment. Another reason scientists looked at this idea is how geologically stable many deep ocean basins are. In some places, these sediments have been sitting undisturbed for millions of years, slowly building up layer by layer at a rate of only a few millimeters every 1,000 years. Once something is buried deep within those layers, it's incredibly isolated from the rest of the ocean. Because of this, researchers in the past suggested that nuclear waste containers could theoretically be buried beneath these clay layers, where the sediments would help lock in the radioactive elements. The idea has mostly remained theoretical due to international laws and environmental concerns, but it highlights something pretty surprising about the deep ocean. Parts of the seafloor act like natural chemical vaults, capable of trapping dangerous materials for incredibly long periods of time. Story 7. One of the creepiest experiences people talk about isn't necessarily something mysterious in the ocean itself. It's surf casting at night. If you've never heard of it, surf casting is a type of fishing where people wade or swim out into the surf and cast their lines from deeper water to reach fish that stay farther offshore. During the day, it's pretty straightforward, but at night, it becomes a completely different experience. Picture this. It's pitch black. The only light may be coming from a distant shoreline or a faint glow from the moon. You walk into the water slowly, feeling the sand shift under your feet, while waves push and pull around your legs. Eventually the water gets waist deep, then chest deep, and at that point, you can't see anything below the surface. Logically, you know there probably isn't anything dangerous around. Most surf zones don't have predators lurking around humans. But your brain doesn't care about logic when you're standing in the ocean at night. Every little thing suddenly feels suspicious. A strand of seaweed brushes your leg. Your brain immediately jumps to, something grabbed me. A wave bumps your side unexpectedly. It feels like something just swam past you. Even the natural movement of water around your knees can make it feel like something is circling you. The weird part is that nothing is actually happening. It's just the combination of total darkness, deep water, and your imagination going into overdrive. But for those few minutes while you're standing out there casting into the black ocean, your brain is absolutely convinced that the seaweed touching your leg might actually be some unknown creature rising out of the deep. Story 8. Spearfishing or snorkeling. I'm in the Atlantic. Depth is about 30 to 50 feet with a lot of pocket reefs around. I swim away from a reef to see what is in that direction. Visibility is about 40 feet. In front of me, at the surface, right at the edge of visibility, I see a massive body. What I can see is around 2 to 3 feet thick and about 6 to 10 feet long. I can only see a body. I can't see a tail or head. It is a light silver with somewhat darker golden or brown stripes. It was only there for a second. It must have been turning to go the other direction, and I only saw a part of its body. I had never seen anything like that. I was curious and intrigued. I started to swim towards it to see what it was. I got about 12 feet in that direction when a fright came through my body. It was a primal, undeniable feeling of absolute dread and horror. My body was telling me that whatever that thing was, I needed to get the hell out of the water as fast as I could. I stopped swimming towards it and immediately pivoted back to the boat. I swam on my back so I could keep looking behind me in the direction that thing had been. I don't know what that thing was, but it was massive. It was a giant, and I was a fly. Some part of my animal brain knew what it was, and it knew that it was a danger. Story 9. Not me, but my older brother. A friend of his ran a museum and was able to locate a ship that went down in Lake Michigan back in the 1800s. My brother's job was to dive down to the wreck with a few others, wait outside the hull while they went inside, then wait for them to punch a hole through the rotted wooden hull and hand him bags filled with whatever they could find. He said the creepiest part was after they punched a hole to hand out the bags. Sometimes a shoe would go floating by one of the people that went down with the wreck and lost their lives. He said he felt like he was disturbing someone's grave, even though they had permission to visit the wreck and recover what they could for the museum. Story 10. One of the scariest moments people working at sea talk about is when something suddenly suggests the oxygen levels are dropping. Imagine you're deep underwater on a research vessel, submarine, or inside a pressurized habitat. Everything seems normal. People are working, equipment is humming, and the environment is stable. Then, someone checks the oxygen analyzer and the numbers suddenly look wrong. The oxygen level appears to be dropping fast. That's the kind of reading that instantly makes everyone's stomach sink. In a sealed environment, oxygen isn't just another measurement. It's literally the thing keeping everyone alive. If the levels actually start falling, it could mean a serious system failure, a leak, or some kind of chemical imbalance inside the life support system. And the worst part is how quickly your mind jumps ahead. You start doing the math. How long do we have? Is the scrubber failing? Is oxygen being consumed somewhere faster than expected? Even if the drop only shows up for a moment on the screen, it's enough to make your heart absolutely plummet. People scramble to double-check readings, cross-reference other sensors, and verify the life support system. Those few seconds feel incredibly long. Then someone checks the analyzer again, and suddenly the numbers look completely normal. Turns out the whole thing was just a malfunctioning sensor, a glitch in the oxygen analyzer that briefly reported the wrong data. No leak, no emergency, no crisis. But even after the issue is confirmed to be harmless, there's always that lingering feeling. For a moment, everyone in that room had the same thought. What if that reading had been real? And in the deep ocean, where help is far away and the environment is unforgiving, that's a thought that sticks with you. Story 11. Not me, but an acquaintance who used to be an industrial diver. There was a ferry accident in the Philippines, and it turned out that the Del Monte company was illegally using the ferry to ship massive barrels of a banned pesticide to some of their plantations there. Thus, it had the potential to be a toxic disaster with those barrels of poison trapped in there, and they could not recover the bodies of the dead until the pesticides were removed. My friend's company in the U.S. was hired to retrieve the barrels with the corpses still underwater in the ferry. By this point, the bodies had floated to the top of the upside-down hull, and their hair was hanging down, swaying in the currents. The divers did successfully remove the hazard, after which the bodies could finally be removed. However, the event caused my friend so much trauma that he left that field altogether and now works on land. Can you just imagine? Story 12. One story that stuck with a lot of people online isn't about sea monsters or paranormal encounters. It's unsettling for a completely different reason. The diver who shared it said he was deep diving with his father when something absolutely terrifying happened. While underwater, he suddenly saw what he described as a massive, Lovecraftian creature moving through the darkness ahead of them. According to him, it was enormous, far larger than anything that should exist in the ocean, and in a moment that felt horrifyingly real, he watched the creature envelop his father. Imagine seeing that while you're already deep underwater. Your heart would spike instantly. There's no quick escape, no way to confirm what you're seeing, and the ocean around you is already dark and disorienting. At that moment, the diver was completely convinced something impossible had just happened right in front of him. But when they surfaced, things didn't line up with what he experienced. His father was completely fine. Later, the diver came to realize something even more disturbing than a sea monster. What he experienced wasn't a creature at all. It was a hallucination. His schizophrenia had begun manifesting while he was underwater. And that's what makes the story so chilling. Not because of some unknown creature lurking in the deep, but because your own brain can create something that feels 100% real, even in one of the most extreme environments on Earth. When you're deep underwater, surrounded by darkness and pressure, your senses are already strained. If your mind suddenly turns against you in that moment, the line between reality and imagination can completely collapse. And that might be even more terrifying than any monster in the ocean. Story 13. Milky Sea Phenomenon. Imagine sailing in the middle of the ocean at night, far from land, when suddenly the water around your ship starts glowing. Not just small sparkles like the usual bioluminescent plankton, but the entire ocean surface lighting up in a soft, pale white glow. The water can look almost like a giant sheet of glowing milk, stretching all the way to the horizon. This isn't a small patch either. Some reports describe glowing areas larger than entire countries, sometimes covering tens of thousands of square kilometers. Ships sailing through it say the glow is steady and uniform, not flashing or sparkling like typical bioluminescence. The wake of the ship can even appear as darker trails cutting through the glowing water. For centuries, sailors had no idea what caused it. Some thought it was supernatural. Others thought it was moonlight reflecting in strange ways. Today, scientists believe Milky Seas are caused by enormous colonies of bioluminescent bacteria, particularly a species called Vibrio harveyi. When these bacteria reach extremely high concentrations, they start glowing all at once through a chemical reaction that produces light. But here's the weird part. Scientists still don't fully understand how these massive glowing patches form or why the bacteria synchronize their light over such huge areas. Because the phenomenon is so rare, it's been difficult to study directly. Most evidence comes from satellite images and occasional ship encounters. So even today, sailors sometimes report sailing through an ocean that suddenly looks like a glowing white desert under the night sky. A natural light show so massive it can literally be seen from space. Story 14. The Bloop. In 1997, scientists working with underwater listening devices for the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, picked up an incredibly powerful sound coming from the South Pacific Ocean. These hydrophones, basically underwater microphones, were originally designed to detect submarines, but they sometimes capture unusual natural sounds as well. And this one was strange. The signal was extremely loud, low frequency, and powerful enough to be detected by sensors over 5,000 kilometers apart. When scientists analyzed the recording, the sound had a rising, almost organic pattern that made it seem eerily similar to something biological. That's when speculation exploded. Some people suggested it could be coming from an unknown gigantic sea creature, possibly even larger than a blue whale. The internet quickly ran with the idea, especially because the sound source appeared to come from a remote part of the ocean near Antarctica, one of the least explored places on Earth. But over time, scientists began leaning toward a more natural explanation. Further analysis suggested that the bloop was most likely caused by a large icequake, essentially a massive chunk of Antarctic ice cracking or breaking apart. When glaciers fracture, or when huge icebergs scrape and collapse, they can produce incredibly loud sounds that travel long distances underwater. Even so, the bloop remains one of those recordings that captures people's imagination. For a brief moment in the late 90s, scientists heard something enormous echoing through the depths of the ocean, and for a while, nobody could say for sure what made it. Story 15. One of the most famous ocean mysteries ever talked about is the Bermuda Triangle. For decades, it's been linked to stories of ships disappearing, planes vanishing, and strange navigation problems in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The Bermuda Triangle is a loosely defined region between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. Starting around the mid-20th century, stories began circulating about vessels and aircraft that supposedly vanished without a trace while passing through the area. Some reports described compasses spinning wildly, radios failing, or pilots getting completely disoriented before disappearing. One of the most famous cases often mentioned is Flight 19, a group of 5 U.S. Navy training planes that vanished in 1945 during a navigation exercise. According to reports, the pilots became confused about their location. Their compasses seemed unreliable, and contact was eventually lost. Even a rescue plane sent to search for them disappeared later the same day. Stories like that fueled decades of speculation. People proposed all kinds of explanations: hidden underwater alien bases, time portals, magnetic anomalies, or even lost technology from the mythical city of Atlantis. But when scientists and investigators looked deeper into the claims, the mystery became less supernatural and more complicated. Many of the incidents occurred in one of the busiest shipping and flight routes in the world, meaning accidents were statistically more likely simply due to traffic. Natural explanations have also been suggested, including sudden storms, powerful ocean currents like the Gulf Stream, navigation errors, and even methane gas bubbles rising from the seafloor that could potentially affect buoyancy. Today, most researchers don't believe the Bermuda Triangle is anything paranormal. But the mix of real disappearances, dramatic stories, and the vast, unpredictable nature of the ocean has kept the legend alive for generations. Story 16. One of the most mysterious places on Earth is the Mariana Trench, the deepest known part of the world's oceans. Located in the western Pacific Ocean, it's essentially a massive scar in the seafloor where one tectonic plate is sliding underneath another. At its deepest point, called Challenger Deep, the trench reaches about 11,000 meters, nearly 7 miles, below the surface. To put that into perspective, if you dropped Mount Everest into the trench, its peak would still be more than a kilometer underwater. Down there, the conditions are absolutely extreme. The pressure is over 1,000 times greater than at sea level. Temperatures are just above freezing, and sunlight has never reached those depths. It's a place of total darkness and crushing pressure that would instantly destroy most equipment and humans. And yet, life still exists there. Scientists have discovered strange creatures adapted to the trench's brutal conditions: ghostly snailfish, transparent shrimp-like animals, giant single-celled organisms, and bacteria that survive in ways we're still trying to understand. Some animals there have soft bodies and special chemical adaptations that keep their cells from collapsing under the pressure. Even with modern technology, the Mariana Trench remains incredibly unexplored. In fact, we've explored less of the deep ocean than we have the surface of the Moon or Mars. Only a handful of crewed missions have ever reached the bottom. What's even stranger is that researchers have found things down there that shouldn't really be there, like plastic debris and chemical pollutants, showing that even the most remote places on Earth aren't completely untouched. The trench is a reminder that the deepest parts of our planet are still largely unknown. Somewhere in that endless darkness, there could be ecosystems and species that humanity hasn't even imagined yet. Story 17. The giant oarfish. If you ever saw one unexpectedly while diving, you'd probably think you just discovered a sea monster. Oarfish are the longest bony fish in the world, sometimes growing up to 8 to 11 meters, 26 to 36 feet long. Their bodies are incredibly thin and ribbon-like, almost like a giant silver streamer floating through the water. Running along their back is a bright red fin that stretches nearly the entire length of their body, giving them a really eerie appearance as they move. What makes them even stranger is how rarely they're seen. Oarfish usually live in the deep ocean hundreds to thousands of meters below the surface, in a zone humans almost never visit. Because of that, most encounters happen when one is sick, dying, or has been pushed up toward the surface by unusual ocean conditions. When they do appear, the sightings can be pretty shocking. Imagine standing on a beach and suddenly seeing a 30-foot-long silver serpent-like fish wash ashore. For centuries, sightings like this likely helped fuel legends about giant sea serpents reported by sailors. Even their behavior is unusual. Oarfish are sometimes observed floating vertically in the water, head up and tail down, slowly drifting through the deep sea while feeding on plankton and small crustaceans. Despite their massive size, they're actually harmless and fairly fragile creatures. Because they live so deep and are rarely observed alive, scientists still know surprisingly little about their behavior. Most of what we know comes from occasional strandings or brief encounters captured on deep-sea cameras. So somewhere in the dark depths of the ocean, these giant silver ribbon fish are quietly drifting through the water, one of the closest real-life things we have to the sea serpents of old sailor legends. Story 18. One of the most mysterious parts of the ocean is something simply called the abyss. Scientists refer to it as the abyssal zone, a vast region of the ocean that lies between about 4,000 and 6,000 meters, 13,000 to 20,000 feet, below the surface. Down there, the environment is about as alien as Earth can get. Sunlight never reaches these depths, meaning the entire world is in permanent darkness. Temperatures hover just above freezing, and the pressure is so intense it would instantly crush most submarines and equipment not specifically built to survive it. For a long time, scientists believed the abyssal plains were basically empty, just endless stretches of cold, muddy seafloor with very little life. But when deep-sea exploration technology improved, researchers discovered something surprising. The abyss is far from lifeless. Strange creatures roam the darkness. There are translucent sea cucumbers that slowly crawl across the seafloor, spider-like crabs, bizarre fish with enormous jaws, and animals that produce their own glowing light through bioluminescence. Most of the food down there comes from something scientists call marine snow. Tiny particles of organic material, dead plankton, waste, and microscopic debris slowly drift down from the surface like underwater snowfall. For many abyssal creatures, This constant rain of nutrients is the main source of survival. The scale of the abyss is hard to imagine. Abyssal plains cover more than half of Earth's surface, making them one of the largest habitats on the planet. And yet, despite how huge they are, we've only explored a tiny fraction of them. Entire ecosystems could still be waiting in the darkness, completely unknown to science. In many ways, the abyss isn't just deep ocean. It's one of the least explored environments on Earth. Story 19. When most people think of coral, they imagine colorful tropical reefs in warm, shallow water, full of sunlight. But one of the lesser-known ocean facts is that most coral species don't actually live there at all. In fact, about 2/3 of all known coral species live in deep, dark, and cold parts of the ocean. These are called cold water corals, and they exist in environments that are the complete opposite of tropical reefs. Instead of bright sunlight and warm water, these corals grow in total darkness, thousands of meters below the surface. Some have even been discovered nearly 3 miles deep, where the pressure is crushing and temperatures can drop to around -2 degrees Celsius. Unlike tropical corals, deep-sea corals don't rely on photosynthetic algae for energy, since no sunlight reaches those depths. Instead, they survive by filter feeding, capturing tiny particles of organic material drifting through the water. Over time, these corals can build massive reef-like structures on the seafloor. Some deep-sea coral reefs stretch for hundreds of kilometers, creating habitats for fish, crabs, shrimp, and many other deep ocean species. Another surprising thing is how long they live. Some deep-sea corals grow extremely slowly and can live for thousands of years, making them some of the oldest living structures on Earth. The deep ocean might seem empty at first glance, but hidden in the darkness are entire coral ecosystems thriving in freezing temperatures and crushing pressure, proof that life can adapt to environments far more extreme than we once thought. Story 20. One really fascinating thing about the ocean that most people don't realize is how incredibly well sound travels underwater. In air, sound moves at roughly 1,100 feet per second. But in seawater, it travels much faster, around 4,800 feet per second, though the exact speed depends on factors like temperature, salinity, and water pressure at different depths. Because of these conditions, the ocean can form something called a sound channel, where sound waves get trapped between layers of water. Instead of spreading out and fading quickly like they do in air, the sound bounces within these layers and can travel thousands of miles across the ocean. This effect is sometimes called the SOFAR channel, sound fixing and ranging, and it's one of the reasons underwater listening systems can detect things happening extremely far away. A dramatic example of this happened in 2000 with the sinking of the Russian submarine Kursk submarine disaster. When the submarine exploded in the Barents Sea, the sound didn't just stay in that region. The explosion was so powerful that underwater monitoring stations around the world picked it up. In fact, many global sonar and hydrophone arrays detected the blast, even stations thousands of miles away. That's because the sound energy traveled through these deep ocean sound channels almost like it was moving through a giant natural acoustic tunnel. The ocean, in a way, acts like a massive speaker system for the planet. A loud enough noise in one part of the ocean can echo through the water and be heard across entire ocean basins. So while the deep sea might seem silent and isolated, it's actually a place where sound can travel farther than almost anywhere else on Earth. Story 21. One of the strangest creatures in the ocean is something often called the immortal jellyfish. Its scientific name is Turritopsis dohrnii, previously known as Turritopsis nutricula, and its life cycle works in a way that almost sounds like science fiction. Most jellyfish follow a pretty simple life cycle. They start as tiny polyps attached to the seafloor, grow into free-swimming adult jellyfish, called medusae, reproduce, and eventually die. But this species can do something completely different. When an adult immortal jellyfish becomes stressed, whether from injury, starvation, or old age, it can actually reverse its life cycle. Instead of dying, the adult jellyfish transforms its cells and shrinks back into the polyp stage, essentially turning itself into a younger version of itself again. From there, the polyp can grow into a brand new jellyfish. This process, known as cellular transdifferentiation, allows the organism to repeatedly reset its life cycle. In theory, if nothing kills it, the jellyfish could repeat this process over and over indefinitely. That's why it's often called biologically immortal. Of course, in reality, most of them don't live forever. They're tiny, fragile, and pretty low on the food chain, so many get eaten by fish, sea turtles, or other predators long before they can restart their life cycle. Still, the existence of a creature that can age backwards has fascinated scientists for years. Researchers study it closely in hopes of understanding how cells change and repair themselves. Knowledge that could someday influence research on aging and regenerative medicine. So while the ocean is full of strange life forms, the immortal jellyfish might be one of the few animals on Earth that has found a way to cheat death, at least in theory. Story 22. One deep-sea mystery that fascinated scientists for years is what some people called the giant cannibal shark incident. The story began when researchers studying sharks in the ocean tagged a female great white shark with a tracking device. The shark, named Shark Alpha, tagged Great White, was about 9 feet long and was released back into the ocean so scientists could monitor her movements and body temperature. But not long after, something very strange happened. The tracking data suddenly showed a massive spike in temperature, far higher than the surrounding ocean water. At the same time, the tag rapidly sank to deeper waters. Eventually, the device washed ashore, and when scientists recovered it, the data suggested something shocking. The shark had been eaten whole. The internal temperature recorded by the tag briefly matched the warm body temperature of a much larger predator before dropping again once the tag was expelled. Based on the data, researchers estimated the animal that swallowed the shark could have been at least 16 feet long. At first, speculation went wild online. Some people even wondered if it could be evidence of something enormous, maybe even a surviving prehistoric predator like Megalodon. But scientists eventually settled on a far more realistic explanation. Another, much larger great white shark. Great whites are known to occasionally attack and eat smaller members of their own species, especially in territorial or feeding situations. In this case, it appears a larger shark simply turned the smaller one into lunch. Still, the data gave researchers a rare glimpse into the brutal reality of life in the ocean, where even one of the sea's top predators can suddenly become prey to something bigger lurking below. Story 23. The Cold War happened in 1968 when 3 separate military submarines from 3 different countries disappeared within a few months of each other. The first was the Soviet submarine K-129, a ballistic missile submarine that vanished in March 1968, somewhere in the Pacific Ocean with 98 crew members on board. The Soviet Union launched a huge search operation, but couldn't find it. Unknown to the public at the time, the United States secretly located the wreck using underwater listening systems. Years later, the CIA even attempted to recover parts of the submarine in a classified mission called Project Azorian, using a specially built ship. Just 2 months later, another submarine disappeared. This time the Israeli submarine INS Dakar. It was traveling from the United Kingdom to Israel when contact was suddenly lost in January 1968. Despite large search efforts, it wasn't located until 1999, when the wreck was finally found in the Mediterranean Sea. Then, in May 1968, the U.S. Navy submarine USS Scorpion, SSN 589, also vanished in the Atlantic Ocean while returning from a mission. The submarine and its 99 crew members were later found on the seafloor southwest of the Azores. At the time, the fact that 3 submarines from rival nations disappeared in the same year sparked a huge amount of speculation. Some people suspected secret Cold War battles, underwater collisions, or experimental weapons. Today, most investigations suggest each submarine likely sank due to different mechanical failures or accidents, not a single connected event, but the timing remains eerie. In just a few months, during 1968, 3 advanced submarines from 3 different navies vanished beneath the ocean, reminding everyone just how dangerous and unforgiving the deep sea can be. Story 24. The legend of Atlantis is one of the oldest and most famous ocean mysteries in history. The story first appeared in the writings of the ancient Greek philosopher Plato around 360 BC. According to him, Atlantis was a powerful and highly advanced island civilization that existed thousands of years before his time. In Plato's story, Atlantis was incredibly wealthy and technologically advanced, but its people eventually became corrupt. As punishment, the gods caused the island to sink into the ocean in a single day and night of misfortune. For centuries, people have debated whether Atlantis was real or just a philosophical story. One popular theory suggests the legend may have been inspired by the Minoan civilization, which lived on the island of Santorini in the Mediterranean Sea. Around 1600 BC, Santorini experienced one of the most powerful volcanic eruptions in human history, known as the Minoan eruption. The explosion destroyed much of the island and likely created massive tsunamis that devastated nearby civilizations. Archaeologists later discovered the buried city of Akrotiri, a remarkably advanced settlement preserved under volcanic ash, complete with multi-story buildings, plumbing systems, and detailed wall paintings. Some researchers believe stories of this catastrophic event may have traveled through generations and eventually reached Plato, who turned it into the story of Atlantis. Of course, many people still believe Atlantis might be something more mysterious, an unknown lost civilization somewhere beneath the ocean. But whether it was a real place, a misunderstood historical disaster, or simply a philosophical tale, the idea of a powerful city swallowed by the sea continues to capture people's imagination thousands of years later. Story 25. One of the most famous sea monster sightings in naval history happened in 1848 aboard the British warship HMS Daedalus, 1826. While sailing in the South Atlantic Ocean near the coast of Africa, several crew members, including the ship's captain, Peter McCuhay, reported seeing something extraordinary moving through the water. According to their account, a massive serpent-like creature surfaced roughly 100 feet away from the ship. The sailors described it as having a long neck rising several feet out of the water with what looked like the head of a snake or reptile, its body stretched far behind it across the ocean surface. The crew estimated the visible portion of the creature was at least 60 feet long, possibly longer. Even stranger, they said it moved quickly and smoothly, gliding through the water without the large splashes you'd expect from a whale or large fish. Because multiple trained naval officers witnessed the event, The report attracted a lot of attention when it was later published in the Times newspaper in London. The sighting quickly became one of the most famous examples of the legendary sea serpent stories sailors had been telling for centuries. Of course, scientists later proposed more realistic explanations. Some believe the crew may have seen a large oarfish, which can grow incredibly long and sometimes swims near the surface. Others suggest it could have been a misidentified giant sea turtle or even a group of animals appearing as one long body from a distance. Still, what makes the incident so intriguing is the credibility of the witnesses. These weren't random sailors telling tall tales. This was a disciplined Royal Navy crew describing something they truly couldn't explain. And even today, the HMS Daedalus sea serpent remains one of the most debated sea monster sightings ever recorded. Story 26. Trucks belong on the road, but somehow, some of them end up at the bottom of the ocean. It sounds strange, but divers and researchers occasionally discover entire vehicles sitting on the seafloor, sometimes surprisingly intact. In some cases, the explanation is simple: cargo accidents. Ships transporting vehicles have occasionally lost containers during storms, sending trucks, cars, and heavy equipment straight into the ocean. Other times, the vehicles were deliberately sunk. Old trucks and other large metal structures are sometimes placed underwater as part of artificial reef projects. Over time, marine life begins to colonize the metal surfaces. Corals attach themselves to the frame, algae grows across the body, and fish start using the structure as shelter. Eventually, what used to be a vehicle becomes part of a thriving underwater habitat. But there are also more mysterious discoveries. Some divers have stumbled across isolated trucks sitting alone on the seabed, far from known dumping sites or shipping routes. In certain cases, the story behind how they got there has been lost to time. Was it cargo that fell overboard decades ago? A vehicle pushed into the ocean during construction projects? Or something else entirely? After years underwater, the trucks start to look eerie. Rust eats away at the metal, windows disappear, and sea life slowly takes over. Fish swim through what used to be the cab, while coral grows where headlights once were. It's a strange sight, something built for highways and cities now sitting silently in the deep ocean, slowly becoming just another part of the underwater world. Story 27. Just like trucks, planes occasionally find their way to the bottom of the ocean, and when they do, they become some of the most haunting wrecks divers can encounter. Sometimes the explanation is tragic. Throughout history, aircraft have been lost over the ocean due to mechanical failures, storms, fuel problems, or navigation errors. When these planes crash into the sea, they can sink thousands of meters down, often remaining hidden for decades before anyone finds them. Many World War II aircraft still rest on the seafloor today. In places like the Pacific, divers have discovered entire fighter planes and bombers sitting almost exactly as they landed, slowly being reclaimed by the ocean. Coral grows along the wings, fish swim through the cockpit, and the aircraft gradually transforms into an artificial reef. Other planes ended up underwater intentionally. Retired aircraft are sometimes deliberately sunk to create artificial reefs, just like ships and vehicles. Once submerged, the structure becomes a shelter for marine life, attracting schools of fish, sponges, and corals that eventually turn the wreck into a thriving underwater ecosystem. But some aircraft wrecks remain mysterious. The ocean is vast, and countless planes that disappeared during flights over open water have never been found. In many cases, investigators only know the last radio transmission before the aircraft vanished into the endless ocean. When wreckage is eventually discovered, sometimes decades later, it can feel like uncovering a frozen moment in history, preserved in the silent darkness of the deep sea. It's a strange reminder that even machines built to fly thousands of feet in the sky can eventually end up resting in one of the deepest and most unexplored places on Earth. Story 28. Ferries are designed to carry huge numbers of passengers, vehicles, and cargo across relatively short routes, often traveling between islands or across busy coastal waters. Because they operate so frequently, thousands of ferry crossings happen safely every single day around the world. But like any large ship, ferries are still vulnerable to the ocean. Some have been lost due to severe storms, where rough seas and strong winds overwhelm the vessel. Others have sunk after collisions with other ships, reefs, or underwater obstacles. In rare cases, design flaws or mechanical failures have caused ferries to capsize unexpectedly. When a ferry sinks, it usually becomes a massive wreck resting on the sea floor. Over time, these wrecks can turn into entire underwater ecosystems. Coral and algae begin to grow across the hull. Schools of fish gather around the structure, and eventually the ship becomes a kind of artificial reef. For divers, sunken ferries can be both fascinating and eerie. Unlike cargo ships or military vessels, ferries often still contain things from everyday life: rows of seats, staircases, cafeterias, and vehicle decks where cars once stood. Seeing these familiar spaces sitting silently underwater can feel surreal. Some ferry wrecks remain powerful reminders of tragic maritime disasters, while others have been intentionally sunk after retirement to create dive sites and marine habitats. Either way, the ocean has a way of reclaiming even the largest human machines, slowly turning them into part of the underwater world. Story 29. Most people have heard about the mysterious bloop, but there are actually several other strange sounds recorded in the deep ocean that scientists still can't fully explain. Two of the most interesting are known as the train and Julia. These sounds were recorded by underwater microphones called hydrophones, which are used to monitor the oceans for earthquakes, underwater eruptions, ice movement, and even nuclear tests. The hydrophones can pick up sounds from thousands of miles away because sound travels extremely well through seawater. The train was recorded in 1997, somewhere near the Mariana Trench region of the Pacific Ocean. The sound lasts for several minutes and has a rhythmic, mechanical quality, almost like the clattering noise of a distant train moving along tracks. Because of that unusual pattern, scientists gave it the nickname the train. Another strange signal, Julia, was recorded in 1999. This sound is very powerful and low frequency, lasting about 15 seconds. It was strong enough to be detected across multiple hydrophone stations spread across the Pacific. What makes these sounds interesting is that they don't match typical biological noises, such as whale calls like the Antarctic minke whale's bioduck sound, and they also don't perfectly match known geological noises either. Scientists suspect both sounds were likely caused by large ice movements or distant ice quakes in Antarctica, where massive pieces of ice crack, grind, and collide with each other. Those events can produce incredibly powerful sounds that travel huge distances underwater. Still, because the recordings are so unusual and the ocean is so vast, the exact source has never been completely confirmed. It's a reminder that the deep ocean isn't just mysterious visually, even its sounds can be strange and unexplained. Story 30. One of the strangest discoveries ever made on the deep ocean floor is something scientists call Lebensspuren, which translates from German as life traces. These are enormous looping patterns found on the seabed, nearly 13,000 feet, around 4,000 meters, deep in parts of the Atlantic Ocean. When researchers first saw them through remotely operated vehicles, they were shocked by their size and precision. Some of the spiraling trails stretch up to 165 feet across. The patterns look almost like giant geometric doodles carved into the sediment, perfect loops and spirals etched across the muddy ocean floor. At first glance, they look so precise that it's hard to believe they were created by any known animal. Because of their massive size, early speculation suggested they might be made by large, unknown creatures moving along the seabed, or possibly by some strange biological process scientists didn't yet understand. But over time, researchers began to piece together a more surprising explanation. The patterns are most likely created by deep-sea fish, carefully constructing nests in the sediment. As the fish swim along the seabed, they repeatedly fan the sand with their fins, gradually carving out the large circular structures. The purpose is thought to be attracting mates or protecting eggs. Still, what makes the discovery so fascinating is the scale. Even though the fish themselves aren't enormous, their behavior creates patterns so large they look almost like crop circles on the ocean floor. It's another reminder that the deep sea is full of strange things. Sometimes not giant monsters, but behaviors and structures so unusual they almost seem impossible at first glance. Story 31. In 2016, a deep-sea exploration team captured footage of one of the strangest creatures ever seen during an ocean survey. While operating a remotely controlled vehicle on the sea floor, researchers suddenly noticed a small, perfectly round purple organism sitting on a rock. Naturally, they called it the purple orb. The creature looked almost unreal. It was a smooth, spherical blob with a deep purple color, about the size of a golf ball. The most unusual feature was a small opening on one side that looked like a mouth or siphon. When the ROV's camera zoomed in, the scientists watching the live feed were completely puzzled. None of them could immediately identify it. During the recording, you can actually hear the researchers reacting in real time, trying to guess what it might be. Some suggested it could be a type of sea slug, while others thought it might be a new species of tunicate or some kind of unusual marine invertebrate. Eventually, marine biologists suggested it was most likely a plurobranch sea slug, a rarely seen type of deep-sea mollusk. These animals can sometimes appear unusually round when their bodies contract. But even with that explanation, the encounter shows just how strange deep-sea life can look. When animals evolve in complete darkness, crushing pressure, and freezing temperatures, their shapes and colors can be incredibly different from anything we're used to seeing near the surface. The moment also highlights something amazing about ocean exploration. Even today, when scientists send cameras into the deep sea, they can still come across creatures that make experts pause and say, "Wait, what exactly is that?" Story 32. Long before sharks or giant marine reptiles ruled the oceans, there was a strange creature that scientists sometimes call the first great predator of the seas, Anomalocaris. This bizarre animal lived about 520 million years ago during the Cambrian explosion, a time when complex life suddenly began diversifying across the planet. Compared to most animals at the time, Anomalocaris was enormous, reaching lengths of around 1 meter, which made it a giant in those early oceans. Its body looked almost alien. It had 2 large grasping appendages that extended from the front of its head, lined with spines used to grab prey. Behind that sat a circular mouth made of hard plates, arranged like a pineapple ring, designed to crush or tear food apart. Along its sides were flexible swimming flaps that allowed it to glide smoothly through the water. But one of the most fascinating features was its eyes. Fossils discovered in Australia revealed that Anomalocaris had incredibly complex compound eyes, containing around 16,000 lenses each. That's comparable to the vision of modern dragonflies, giving it extremely sharp eyesight. perfect for spotting prey in the ancient seas. For years, scientists believed Anomalocaris hunted heavily armored animals like trilobites, smashing them with its powerful mouth parts. But more recent research suggests its mouth may not have been strong enough to crack hard shells, meaning it might have targeted softer prey instead. Even today, researchers are still studying how this strange creature actually hunted, swam, and interacted with other animals in the Cambrian Ocean. What's amazing is that a predator this advanced appeared so early in Earth's history. It shows that the arms race between predators and prey started hundreds of millions of years ago, and the ocean has been shaping evolution ever since. Story 33. The Sarah Jo was a fishing boat that left Maui in February of 1979 with 5 crew aboard. While they were out, a large storm swept through the area, and all were presumed lost. Then, almost a decade later in September of 1988, John Naughton, who helped with the initial search, was on a wildlife expedition on the deserted atoll Taongi, 2,000 miles from Maui, when he discovered the Sarah Jo on the atoll. Nearby was a makeshift grave for one of the boat's crew, Scott Mormon. No other evidence of the crew was found, and strangely, a government survey of the atoll 6 years earlier reported nothing about the boat being there. Story 34. The Cassie Nicole was a boat that left Richmond Hill, Georgia on April 10, 1990, with 4 crewmen aboard. On the second day of the trip, Nathan Neesmith noticed that the boat was taking on water. The pumps and radio also were not working. The crew soon abandoned ship and entered a life raft. The next day, the boat's hatch cover floated by, and Nathan decided to go with it, thinking it would support him better. After that, he lost sight of the other 3 crew members. However, later that day, he noticed a freighter go by the area several times. He hoped that it had picked up the other crew members. Finally, after 3 days adrift, Nathan was rescued, but the other crew was never found. Then, a few months later, Nathan's sister and the boat's owner began receiving mysterious phone calls from someone in Spanish. They said their names and the names of the crew. In the last call, the caller said in English, "I'm bringing them home." The family of the crew believe that they are alive and being held somewhere in a foreign country. Story 35. Yves, Emmanuel Pan, and Laurent Hernas were French sailors hired to sail a boat to its new owners. Their trip was supposed to take them from Annapolis, Maryland to Guadeloupe. However, they never arrived. A search was launched, and several sightings were reported. Interestingly, most of them occurred along the intercoastal waterway, which was several miles off of their intended course. Disturbingly, several of the witnesses reported seeing a third man on the boat, suggesting that it may have been hijacked. Even more strange was a sighting 2 months later by a police officer in South Carolina. He pulled over a speeding car with 3 men, 2 of which he later identified as the missing sailors. The exact circumstances surrounding their disappearances have never been determined. Story 36. One of the saddest ocean mysteries is the story of what people often call the loneliest whale in the world. Scientists first detected it in 1989 while monitoring underwater hydrophones used to track whale calls across the Pacific Ocean. What caught their attention wasn't just the sound, it was the frequency. Most large whales communicate at much lower frequencies. For example, blue whale calls usually occur around 10 to 40 hertz. But this whale was singing at about 52 hertz, which is much higher than normal. Because of that unusual pitch, researchers began referring to it as the 52 hertz whale. The recordings showed something strange. The whale followed migration routes similar to other baleen whales and repeatedly produced long, complex songs, just like whales normally do during mating season. But there was never any evidence of other whales responding to the calls. That led to the heartbreaking theory that this whale might be calling out to others that can't understand it. Scientists aren't completely sure what species it is. Some believe it could be a hybrid between two whale species, while others think it might simply have a unique vocal anatomy that produces the unusual frequency. Despite the lonely nickname, researchers don't actually know if the whale is truly alone. It may still interact with other whales in ways we just can't detect. Still, the idea of a whale traveling across the vast Pacific Ocean for decades, singing a song that no one answers, has captured people's imagination and turned it into one of the most haunting stories from the deep sea. Story 37. A strange mystery that has popped up in diving communities and maritime forums involves shipwrecks that seem to be slowly disappearing. Divers who regularly visit certain wreck sites have reported returning years later only to find that large sections of the wreck are simply gone. Entire propellers, bronze fittings, engines, and even large steel plates sometimes vanish. In some cases, the wreck looks like it's been cut apart with industrial tools, not just corroded by the ocean. Naturally, this sparked a lot of speculation online. One of the most widely accepted explanations is illegal salvage operations. Many historic shipwrecks contain valuable metals like bronze, copper, and brass, which can be worth a lot of money when recovered. Propellers alone can weigh several tons and contain high-value bronze alloys. Some salvage crews reportedly use specialized diving equipment or remotely operated underwater cutting tools to remove these parts. Because many wrecks lie in remote areas or deep waters, it can be difficult for authorities to monitor them consistently. Another reason certain wrecks are valuable is something called low background steel. Steel produced before the nuclear age, before the 1940s to 1950s, isn't contaminated by trace radioactive particles released during nuclear weapons testing. Because of this, old shipwreck steel can sometimes be used for extremely sensitive scientific instruments. The frustrating part is that when wrecks are stripped like this, they lose historical value. Many of these ships are considered underwater cultural heritage sites, and once key components are removed, historians lose important clues about the ship's design and the events that led to its sinking. So while the ocean naturally erodes shipwrecks over time, in some cases, the real reason parts are disappearing may be far more human. Quiet salvage operations happening far below the surface. Story 38. Well, it isn't deep sea, but it does make me think of Edward McCleary and his sea monster. Basic story. 1962 in Pensacola, Florida, 5 teenage boys get lost 5 miles from shore in the fog. The lone survivor, McCleary, described a creature with a long neck picking off his friends one by one. He even drew a sketch, suspiciously like Nessie. The most obvious answer is, of course, that this was the invention of a traumatized young man who had just watched his friends drown or be picked off by sharks one by one. Some have suggested he actually saw an alligator rising up out of the water given the location, and mistook it for a long, thin creature. Others suggest he was just mentally ill. He had problems later in life. It is a fun one to read about if you are into mystery monsters from the deep, even though the likely explanations are fairly mundane. Story 39. HMS. A Ferry was a British submarine that was lost with all hands in 1951. The location of the wreck is known, and the Board of Inquiry established the most likely cause of the disaster. Strange things allegedly happened during the international search for the Ferry after it was posted as missing. One of the search vessels detected a massive uncharted object sitting on the seabed. Because it was too big to be the Ferry, they noted the position and continued searching. Returning some days later to investigate it, they found the mystery object had gone. A sailor's widow claimed to have been visited by the ghost of a dead World War II submariner who gave her the affray's location. This supposedly occurred before the affray was found, but the location given later turned out to be correct. Story 40. Another strange deep ocean mystery picked up by underwater listening systems is something scientists nicknamed the Upsweep. This unusual sound was first detected in 1991 by hydrophones operated by NOAA. These underwater microphones were originally part of a system designed to monitor submarine activity and seismic events, but they often capture natural ocean sounds as well. The Upsweep stands out because of its very distinct acoustic pattern. When visualized on a spectrogram, the sound appears as long, rising tones, almost like a sweeping upward note, hence the name Upsweep. What makes it even stranger is that the sound doesn't occur randomly. Instead, it appears in seasonal bursts, typically peaking during spring and fall. The signals have been traced to an area of underwater volcanic ridges in the Pacific Ocean, far from land and deep beneath the surface. At first, scientists wondered if the sound could be coming from an unknown marine animal, since many whales and deep-sea creatures produce unusual vocalizations. But the structure of the signal doesn't match known whale calls. Another possibility is that the sound is connected to underwater volcanic activity, things like magma movement, gas escaping through vents, or changes in pressure around hydrothermal systems. Even today, the exact source hasn't been fully confirmed. What makes the Upsweep so interesting is that it's repeated, seasonal, and incredibly loud, meaning something large-scale is producing it somewhere deep in the ocean. It's another reminder that the ocean doesn't just hide mysterious creatures. It's also filled with strange sounds and signals that scientists are still trying to understand.